Dispatch, Ridgemont County, 11:58 p.m. A woman's voice comes through the line, calm, steady, almost rehearsed. "I'd like to report a missing person." The dispatcher asks for a name. "Me," she says. "I'm the missing person." She starts giving her address. She gets through the street number. She never finishes the street. The line goes dead, and nobody on that call ever hears her voice again. That's the file that landed on Detective Marcus Reyes's desk 11 days later, after the county finally admitted it didn't know what to do with it. Because here's the problem. Nobody had reported her missing. Not a husband, not a sister, not a coworker who noticed an empty desk on Monday. No name matched the voice print in any database the county could search. No body turned up, no car abandoned on the shoulder, no credit card frozen mid-swipe. Reyes ran the recording against hospital intake logs, morgue records, even the state's runaway registry. Nothing. His own supervisor wanted to close it inside a week, calling it a prank or a mental health crisis that had already passed, or a wrong number someone panicked over. Was it any of those? Reyes wasn't sure yet, but a woman doesn't rehearse a sentence like, "I'm the missing person," the way you'd rehearse a joke. She rehearses it the way you'd rehearse something you're afraid you won't get the courage to say twice. Reyes worked state, not county, which meant he'd been pulled in specifically because nobody local wanted to own this one. He listened to the recording 9 times before he wrote a single note. What kind of person calls to report herself missing? Someone in shock. Maybe. Someone testing the system before doing something worse. Or someone who already knew, before she dialed, that she wasn't going to get to finish the sentence. He started where every case like this starts, the tower. The call had pinged off a single cell tower 2 miles outside town, off Route 9, a stretch of road with a gas station, a shuttered diner, and not much else. No landline in range, which meant she'd used a cell phone, and the cell phone, when they finally traced the number, belonged to no one. A prepaid burner, activated 4 days before the call, paid for in cash, never used again. That should have been the end of it. A dead number, a dead lead, a case with no name to attach to it. Except Reyes noticed something buried in the county's own dispatch archive that nobody had flagged because nobody had thought to look for it. This wasn't the first call like this. It was the 4th. 2 years earlier, same voice. Dispatch confirmed it against the recording, had called in almost the exact same script. "I'd like to report a missing person. It's me." That time, she'd gotten through 6 digits of an address before the line cut out. 8 months after that, a second call, same voice, further into the address this time, before it dropped again. A third call, 10 months later. Each time, a little more information. Each time, cut off before completion. Each time, filed and forgotten by whoever answered, because a caller who hangs up mid-sentence doesn't usually get a follow-up unit. Why would someone call 4 times over 2 years to report a disappearance that hadn't happened yet? Reyes's first theory was the simple one. Maybe she really was in crisis, over and over, some kind of recurring break that made her dial the same number and say the same words without remembering she'd done it before. He almost wrote that in his notes and moved on. But recurring crises don't usually get more specific with each episode. Hers did. Each call added information the last one hadn't had. That's not a person spiraling. That's a person building something, one piece at a time, and being interrupted before she can hand over the whole thing. Reyes pulled every partial address from every call and laid them side by side. Route number, a set of digits, a word that might have been a street name, might have been a description. None of them formed a complete address on their own. But something about the pattern nagged at him. The way each call picked up almost exactly where the last one had been cut off, like chapters in a book somebody kept getting interrupted while reading aloud. That was the moment the case stopped looking like a woman in crisis and started looking like a woman with a plan. Reyes went back to basics. If she wasn't missing yet, who was she afraid of becoming missing from? He started a list the way every detective starts a list. An ex-boyfriend with a restraining order that had lapsed. A landlord with a history of complaints. a coworker who'd been let go the same month the first call came in. Each one looked promising for about a day, and each one fell apart the moment Reyes checked their whereabouts against the call times. None of them were even in the state for 2 of the 4 calls. Whoever she was hiding from wasn't a stranger with a grudge. It was someone who was always around. Someone who could be anywhere on that stretch of road at any hour without anyone finding it strange. He requested every incident report filed anywhere near Route 9 for the past 3 years. Noise complaints, welfare checks, anything. One name kept surfacing in the margins, never as a suspect, always as the responding officer. Deputy Gil Sandoval, County Sheriff's Office, 11 years on the job, well-liked, first on scene at half the calls in that stretch of road, including, Reyes found, 2 prior welfare checks at a farmhouse off Route 9 that had gone nowhere. Both closed the same day they were opened, both with Sandoval's own signature on the closing paperwork. A deputy who could open and close his own welfare checks. A deputy with a scanner in his truck and a radio that picked up every call routed through county dispatch before Reyes's own unit ever saw it. Suddenly, the burner phones made sense. Suddenly, the 4 separate calls, each one incomplete, each one hung up before finishing, made sense too. If the person you're running from can hear every call that comes through your local dispatch, you don't say his name on the radio. You don't say your address in one clean sentence he could act on before help arrives. You say just enough, and you hang up before he can trace it, and you wait for someone from outside the system to notice the pattern. Reyes laid the 4 partial addresses out one more time, in order, and this time he didn't read them as 4 broken attempts. He read them as 4 pieces of the same sentence. Route number from call 1, house number from call 2. A word from call 3 that wasn't a description at all. It was half of Millbrook, the name of a private drive off Route 9 that didn't show up on most maps. And the fragment from the final call, the one that had reached Reyes's desk, gave him the last 2 digits. Put together, the 4 calls spelled a single address, a farmhouse at the end of Millbrook Lane, the same one Sandoval had signed off on twice before. Reyes drove out that night with 2 units behind him and didn't call ahead on county radio. He'd learned that much by now. Halfway down Route 9, a patrol truck passed him going the other direction, headlights catching the reflective stripe on the door. Sandoval's unit. Reyes didn't slow down, didn't wave, kept his eyes on the road and his radio silent, and only breathed out once the truck's taillights disappeared behind him. He would think about that near miss for a long time afterward. How close 2 years of careful, fragmented phone calls had come to ending in a driveway that night, with the wrong person arriving first. The farmhouse wasn't empty. A woman answered the door, mid-30s, steady eyes, a voice Reyes recognized the second she spoke because he'd listened to it 9 times before he'd ever seen her face. Her name was Dana Whitfield. She wasn't missing. She'd never been missing. She'd been very carefully, very deliberately, building a case file that a local badge couldn't quietly bury, one incomplete phone call at a time, for 2 years, because the man hurting her wore the same uniform as the men who were supposed to protect her. She told Reyes the rest herself, sitting at her own kitchen table, because she finally believed the person listening wasn't going to hand the transcript back to Sandoval. The first call, 2 years ago, was a test, to see if anyone outside the county would ever hear it and ask questions. Nobody had. The second and third calls were insurance. Timed to nights, she knew Sandoval was working a shift on the other side of the county, so he couldn't be the one to intercept them. The fourth call, the one that finally reached Reyes, wasn't an accident either. She'd hung up herself, on purpose, the instant she'd said enough to be findable and not one word more. Because a woman who gives her whole address to a system she doesn't trust isn't being careful. She's gambling. And she'd already gambled 3 times and lost. Sandoval was arrested 2 weeks later, once Reyes had built a case around records the deputy couldn't reach. 2 prior welfare check files quietly reopened, a pattern of dispatch logs showing exactly which calls he'd been near, A locked box in the farmhouse cellar full of photographs and torn-up letters Dana had never been allowed to send. And a woman finally willing to testify because someone from outside had proven he could find her before her own county did. But the twist Reyes didn't expect came from Dana herself, weeks after the arrest, when he stopped by to close out the file. She wasn't the only one. Two other women in a support group she'd quietly joined the year before had used pieces of her method: the burner phone, the partial address spread across separate calls, the deliberate hang-up before the sentence finished, to build their own cases against men who could otherwise hear everything the system heard. Dana hadn't just protected herself. She'd built a way for women to report their own disappearance in installments, on purpose, specifically so no single call could be traced, buried, or explained away by the one person listening for it. Ridgemont County Dispatch still gets calls like hers sometimes. A voice, calm, almost rehearsed, reporting a person missing who is, for now, still very much on the line. And the dispatchers there have learned, the way Reyes had to learn, that a call which goes dead before the address is finished isn't always the end of the story. Sometimes it's the first sentence of one, and the only way to find out is to wait for the second call and the third, and however many more it takes until someone finally hears the whole address, all the way to the end.